Welcome to the latest in our now weekly reaction stream. Rob Staten and Jeff Simmons here to discuss the Seahawks moving to 2-0, defeating the New England Patriots in Boston yesterday. Look, really good win, Jeff. I thought a very strange game whereby at halftime, feeling very confident about where the Seahawks are, feeling really good about it. They've got a 4-point lead. Perhaps foolishly, my expectation was that they were going to go into that second half and maybe even pull away from the Patriots, that they would fix some of the run defense issues, and it would be a good second half to enjoy. And the way they started that second half, you kind of felt that was where it was going to go because they had a really good drive. Obviously, went for the fourth down, didn't get it. And then from that moment right until the end, the Patriots just sort of wrestle control. It looks like they're going to win. And then the game completely flips on a Julian Love block, field goal. And from there, just the Seahawks kept making the plays they needed to make in order to get the job done in the end. So 2-0. How do you feel about the Seahawks after this latest win?
Feel pretty good. It was definitely a frustrating game. The third quarter was really hard to watch, and then early into the fourth quarter. And I put out a tweet once I heard Ken Walker was out that I just, the more I studied New England, I thought there was like a very clear way of beating them. And the first half kind of played into it. I said, if Seattle scores early and you make New England play from behind, they're going to pull away and win the game. And the way the first half went, they essentially set that up. And they had 3 drives in the third quarter, 2 of which were completely garbage. One of them was the fourth down stop. If they scored a touchdown on that first drive, I think they would have gone up 24-10 or 24-13 at that point, and the game would have been over. But they got stopped on that fourth down. I thought they should have kicked at the time, but the analytics probably disagreed with me. And I said, in that tweet, I said, if the game, they don't score early, like what happened, it becomes a 50-50 coin toss game, because the more I studied New England the week before, I was kind of impressed with them. And I came away from the game more impressed with them than anything Seattle really did. Geno Smith I think there's a case he had the best game of his career. And I think I would make that argument relative to how the run game played, how the pass protection was, the amount of, like, if you really go the analytics, like he had 0 off-target throws. But I came away almost like the game played out kind of how I thought. I was a little disappointed in how Seattle's defense played. I thought they were pretty weak overall yesterday, but we saw some good things. The offensive line remains a problem. The running game, we didn't see much from Zach Charbonnet until the final drive, to be honest. I didn't think he played very well, but we learned a lot about Geno Smith. He carried the team to a victory in a game they probably should have lost. And they had that chance to win that game in the third quarter, and then they couldn't stop the New England run game, which is not a great sign. But overall, to win that game in a slugfest in the road, you may look at New England and you say, yeah, they're not great. But I thought that was a very good win in a tough spot yesterday.
Yeah, you couldn't help but sort of look at the New England and think, they could be a pretty good team if Drake May ends up being a quarterback. Obviously they need to improve their offensive line. They need some weapons, but they were impressive. But, you mentioned him, Geno Smith. I thought he was the star of the game. And look, you're quite right. Like, the defense didn't do a great deal. They made some, non-spectacular but no less important plays, getting a stop right at the end of the game, having tied it at 20 apiece. You need to stop them there. You don't let them drive for a field goal. You get the stop in overtime. You get the stop to force the field goal that was blocked in the first place at the end of regulation. You still need to be able to make those plays as a defense and able to win that game. What they didn't have was big interception, a pick six, a fumble recovery, anything like that. So the defense had its moments, but largely disappointing that they gave up 185 yards. And we'll talk a bit about that defensive line. But no help there. The receivers did help Geno, but even then, there were a series of drops that didn't help him. There's no running game. It's not as if the offensive line was amazing in pass protection, and that produced the environment from which Geno Smith to excel. He just went out there and delivered a win. Like, he put the team on his back. I was a little bit surprised that his grade wasn't higher for the game, but then I've got all sorts of, question marks about the way PFF runs its system. I mean, like, how they had the Seahawks having more missed tackles last week than this week. I said it on last night's show. I've got a huge article coming this week, but I cannot believe that Garrett Nussmeier got a 65 grade, playing against South Carolina on the road and doing what he did. And Cam Ward got a 90 grade for basically throwing extended handoffs against Ball State in a game they won 62-0. Like it doesn't make any sense to me. But by the by, enough about PFF. I think he should have had a higher grade because he just consistently made the big plays that he needed to play. He made the chain moving plays. He made the check down sensibly to move the sticks plays. He made the check down to get 4 yards when that's all that's there. Go to the next down plays. He made the downfield shots. All of that without a running game, Jeff. Whether it's the most impressive game of his career or not, I don't know. I can't remember. But boy, it's definitely up there, isn't it? That was a tremendous Geno Smith performance, and he deserves all of the praise that he's been getting in the last 24 hours.
Yeah, I thought his grade should have been higher too. And what he did so well is not only did he use his weapons really well, like I've been more critical of any one of the teams, like usage of Jackson Smith and Jigba, and we saw him almost maximize yesterday. And you're right, there was 5 or 6 pretty egregious drops, 2 from DK, a couple from Noah Fant, which could have cost them the game potentially. JSN had a pretty big one that would have been like a 25-yard pass. But what I love what Geno did is the stuff he did to create and make plays on the run. There's a play he makes where the play is designed to go right. It's not open at all. He cuts back, turns left, and finds Tyler Lockett at the other side of the field. And that was the stuff Russ used to do in his prime. And we haven't really seen that from Geno. I know Geno last year got a lot better at like avoiding sacks, given the pressure. And I've been one of the people that said Geno's the kind of quarterback that needs good offensive line to play well. And week 1, he looked a little skittish to me. And what I saw yesterday is just the kind of thing you want to see from the people that say Geno Smith is a top 10 quarterback. And there's a big group online, the Robert Mays and Derek Klassen and things like that. Of Geno's really good. He doesn't have a good situation, but Geno put a lot of people on all the questions about him. That's the kind of performance we need to see. He carried the team yesterday when things weren't working around him. And he could have had 400 yards. And the fact that he didn't throw any pass where I was just like, what is he doing? And he usually throws a few of those. You've talked about it. He's a streaky player. You saw it the week before. He even that interception, he got hit in the legs, but that was an awful decision. The guy wasn't open at all down the field. So I love the play where he's running right, cuts all the way back left. And even the play in overtime where it was a great design by a Grubb against an all-out blitz to get to Charbonnet. But Geno hasn't made those plays all the time. And we saw at the end of that Dallas game last year where he played excellent, but then the final couple drives, he stalled. And in this game, he really put the team on his back and carried them. And there was even a play where DK cuts back down the sidelines in overtime. And he separates from Christian Gonzalez. But I thought Geno had to roll right. And Geno's getting better now. Last year, he was getting better inside the pocket. Now he's getting better, like creating plays out of structure. And that's a big element to his game because it hasn't been there. So considering like all the things around him, how good New England's defense looked, I thought he just played close to like a all-pro level yesterday. And I have not seen that from Geno Smith.
One or two people have asked what the grade was, and it was an 83.1, which is still a good grade, but I don't understand what's the difference between 83.1 and a 90. Like, I don't really know what else he could have done yesterday, which is why I don't understand why it's 83, even though it's a high grade. Yeah, I watched the second half in the studio that I work, Jeff, before doing the Bengals Chiefs broadcast. So I had like an eye on it, but was also working and sort of planning and preparing for the show. So when I got home, I watched the second half on the condensed version. So it's about 20 minutes just to sort of watch it. The only play that I went back and watched multiple times was when he set off to go to the right, then double back and through from the left-hand side. Because it was just, like you say, I remember watching that and thinking, that's not a play that I would expect Geno Smith to do. And yet he did it very, very well, not completely in control and very composed and poised, doing it. A fantastic performance. And the key for him is going to be, look, I don't expect Geno Smith to play at that level every week. And I don't think, and this is something that I would stress, if Geno Smith doesn't play quite as well as that next week against the Dolphins, people shouldn't overreact to that as much as they shouldn't overreact if he has a good win. I think there has to be some perspective here that he's probably not going to reach that high level every single week. But the key for him is just to avoid the sort of, don't have 7 or 8 great games and then have 7 or 8 mediocre games. Like, he is going to have a bad game at some point or an average game, because every quarterback does. Patrick Mahomes threw 2 interceptions and could have had a third yesterday. And they were so lucky to win that game against the Bengals on a stupid pass interference from a day 3 rookie, making a stupid decision. and they got away with it. So quarterbacks, even the best of the best, will make a mistake and have a bad game. So Geno will have a bad game, but the key is to just, those are to have a few of them as possible and not to have like great runs and bad runs. So fantastic from him. A really good start because he was really good last week. Even better this week. Really good start from Geno Smith. Before we go on to like defensive things, Jeff, let's talk about the offensive line because it's a topic that we often come to. I've got some super chats I want to come to as well. We're going to get to those straight as soon as possible. Keep those coming in and we'll chuck them out. If you've got a question for Jeff, question for myself, if you just want to make a point about the Seahawks, or if you just want to support the channel, get those sent in. But with the offensive line, so last week they ran the ball very well in the second half and the run blocking was good. This week, the run blocking it felt atrocious. And I do give the Patriots a little bit of credit for that, Jeff. I wonder if they said, in many ways, I think they thought, let's make Geno win it in the way that he did. And he did. But they're not going to run it running through the middle and Zach Charbonnet just, going between the tackles. And I think they took that away and probably made life very difficult for the Seahawks in that regard. And perhaps that helped the passing game a little bit. But it still, they didn't seem to move anybody. It never felt like there was anything there for Zach Charbonnet. I've seen people being quite critical of Charbonnet. And, he didn't have a great game by any stretch. But what was he supposed to do? There was nowhere for him to go. And he is not a quick twitch, bounce it outside player like Ken Walker. He is a head down, run up the gut type of runner. So, Jeff, I'm still trying to work out what this offensive line is about. Because if a guy as big as Anthony Bradford and Laken Tomlinson can't just push the pile, it's very frustrating.
Yeah, Anthony Bradford's been a very frustrating player in general because I know Macdonald keeps talking about he's having really good reps, but he's rotating other players in. And yesterday he took a couple boneheaded penalties as well. So Bradford's whole thing is he's supposed to be a really good run blocker that's still learning how to pass protect, but didn't seem like he was creating much yesterday, and they weren't running behind him on some of the short yardage runs. And you saw how much they struggled in their short yardage runs, the 3rd and 1s, the 4th and 1 that got stuffed so easily. And yeah, Laken Tomlinson's been close to a 0 so far. He had some nice blocks in the second half, but you're right. It's definitely concerning that they came back and you saw maybe they can't pass block, but at least they can run block. And their run blocking was close. Like Charles Cross had a solid game. I didn't notice him really at all, which is a good sign for an offensive lineman, but I'm just not happy with what I'm seeing out of either guard. I think Laken Tomlinson is what he is. We talked about it last week. I have not seen anything. I was hoping for a more steady player. You're hoping just like a guy who can fill in. He can be like a competent veteran. He looks like a guy that should be a backup at this point. And Anthony Bradford just has such highs and lows, and I'm seeing more lows than highs. And Christian Haynes is a guy, he came in for one drive. He struggled in pass protection on a couple of plays, but I think he's just a much more steady player than Bradford in terms of there's less ups and downs. And I think the more reps he gets, I think he can add some stability to the group. I don't see him having a Pro Bowl ceiling. And like we saw Dominic Pooney have a great week in week 1. And then yesterday against a more creative scheme, he looked like a fish out of water. And so I would like to see Haynes get in there, but really this just comes back to how they've addressed this guard position. They haven't put enough talent in that spot. Stone Forsythe is a 3rd string right tackle. He was fine. But I think over a larger sample size, he's going to show his flaws. And he's a guy, he's so tall, Forsythe. He can't get a lot of leverage. So he's not going to be good in run blocking. He's more of a pass protector because of how long he is. But he loses a lot in leverage, and guys can just run by him because he's so tall. And he's not like thick. And so until Abe Lucas comes back, and they're hoping, we don't know when he's going to be back. We don't know what kind of player he's going to be. But they're just going to have to survive this next few weeks. And it's hard to think like this group is just going to all of a sudden turn around unless Christian Haynes comes in and it's a 3rd-round rookie that isn't winning playing time right now. But I think it's going to be a lot of the same, unfortunately. And I think it just comes back to they need to get better personnel there. I think they can coach it all they want.
I thought it was a reasonably good point, Jeff, by Brady Henderson last week, in that he said when Anthony Bradford got injured in week 1, Christian Haynes came in and then he immediately put Bradford back into the game.
Yeah.
And it spoke to perhaps, although we as kind of mere observers watching the preseason games, and some of the fans will have gone to training camp and observed, it feels like clearly within the building, they think that Bradford is at least some way ahead of Christian Haynes because they've gone with him and started him and they persevere with him. But then they rotated Haynes in, and that's, with the point that you just made there, you kind of wonder a little bit, can Haynes just be consistently average as a rookie or even slightly below average? But is that better than Anthony Bradford getting flagged for a hold, Anthony Bradford getting whipped, but then Anthony Bradford having a superstar block where he pummels someone into the ground, and you think, well, okay, it's just two, boom or bust. And, Laken Tomlinson, he's of a certain age where you kind of just hope that with his experience and his size and his durability, you just don't notice him. And yet I keep noticing him, Jeff. Like, I stop being noticeable, Laken Tomlinson. And I don't know. It's hard, Jeff, because I don't want to talk about the offensive line every week because it does something bad. But I don't know how you fix this. Like, one of the things I've been tossing around is like, what can they do? What is out there? That's virtually nothing. They've done the move that they could do with Connor Williams. And I'm like, is there anything else? And the only thing I can think of, and I just don't think this is going to happen, but it's the only thing I could think of, was the Giants seem to have just given up on Evan Neal. Like, his bust is a bust. He is an epic top 10 bust. And the Giants already look like they are done. Now, is their GM, does he have any power whatsoever to say, hi, is that the owner? Yeah. I'm giving away the top 10 pick that I used 2 years ago. I don't know. His job security might not be secure enough to do that. But he can't, there's a British guy starting at right tackle for the Giants right now in Jermaine Illuminor. Like, he's behind a British guy. So if they do not think that he's going to work out for them, I think he's got like the rest of this season and next season on his contract. If they think he is done, are they better off just getting something for him rather than just cutting him at the end of the season or whatever? Like, and he has played, I thought coming out he was a first round guard. I did not think he was a tackle. So I'm just wondering, like, and he has played some tackle. He might be better than Stone Forsyth. He might not be. But the point is that if you were to give them a day 3 pick, I don't know if it just looks like he's done over there. Like, if you give them something, like if they've written him off, if you give them something and you get him in and he can compete with Tomlinson or he can compete with Stoneford, or it just gives you that bit of extra competition and depth, is that somebody who could do it? I think the Giants save something like $2 million if they move on. It's not a lot, but again, it's better than nothing if they've given up on him. It's the only thing I can think of, Jeff, and it's clutching at straws because the chances are he'd just come to Seattle and be crap as well as he has been in New York. But it does feel as if, like, at the moment, I need to find something that can be a solution other than just keeping my fingers crossed every single week that Anthony Bradford and Laken Tomlinson are going to turn this around.
Yeah, I think you are grasping at straws. I don't know if you saw any of that Hard Knocks Giants series where the GM is in a weird spot with the owner, where the owner was not happy they got rid of Saquon Barkley. Let's say that. It was not happy with some of the GM's approach. And then I don't know if the GM, who's probably on the hot seat, if things turn out the way they are, if he's like, I'm going to trade one of my highest drafted players that failed for nothing. I think that's a tough thing. But here's the problem, Rob. I don't know how much you've gotten a chance to watch the rest of the league. There are a lot of bad offensive lines. And I saw a stat today. For the first 2 weeks in the whole league, in the last couple of years, like 2022, 2021, from like 5 years in a row, there was about 105 to 110 touchdown passes across the whole league. This year, it's 65. It's dropped almost 50 touchdowns in the first 2 weeks. And some of that's obviously quarterback play. All the rookie quarterbacks are badly struggling right now. But I think that speaks to how many bad offensive lines there are. And even some of the good ones, like San Francisco looked really good in week 1. They gave up a ton of pressures against Brian Flores yesterday. And so I would love to come out and say, Evan Neal would be great. I would love to see them take a flyer on that just because he had a high pedigree and he seemed closest thing to a sure thing. And the other guy who was drafted in that draft, Ike Ekwonu, has been awful. And those two fan bases are like, I wish we took Charles Cross. The Seahawks fans before this year was like, Charles Cross is not that good. So there is a shortage around the league, unfortunately. And that's why the Chargers went out and they took Joe Alt over Malik Neighbors and why they thought offensive line is the skill position because it's more limited. And that's the problem right now. No one has an extra player to trade. And if they do, there's going to be 20 teams interested in them. So how do you win that trade? It's going to be tricky. So unfortunately, like if you watch the Rams yesterday, I don't know if you caught any of that game, they can barely put out an offensive line. They have 4 of their 5 guys injured, and they got like rolled out of the stadium yesterday. And like other than like the Lions and the Chiefs have a new left tackle, that was impacting them yesterday. You kind of called that game. They had a couple penalty issues. They had to bench them for a little bit. There's just not a lot of good offensive lines. And so who's going to have someone? And I'm seeing comments like the Seahawks should have signed Damian Lewis. We had Damian Lewis for all these years. He stunk. He was fine. He made $14 million a year to go to Carolina. So there's no way he would have re-signed unless you paid him that much money. And that would have been an inane contract to give out. So you see the shortage around the league. And yeah, it would have been nice to keep someone you drafted and not to develop a left guard and go dumpster diving again like they always do. But this is why we call them to draft first-round guards and why I disagree with John Schneider's approach, because you look around the league, there's just not a lot out there. And Pittsburgh took a million shots, and they have one of the more young offensive line that's ascending. But I don't know, man. I don't have a great answer to this one. It's a league-wide problem.
It really is. And have you seen the news on the Rams in the last couple of moments? Sean McVay has announced that Cooper Kupp is going to be out for an extended period of time, and the injured reserve is a distinct possibility. So they were already really sort of injury ravaged, and now losing Cooper Kupp as well. And you just wonder with the Rams, is that pretty much it? I mean, like, you get blown out like that. That's really bad. And the thing that I noticed about the fact they got blown out was that typically when you have a scoreline like they had in Arizona, it's a couple of pick sixes or a fumble or a kick return or something that really takes the game away from you. I think they had one turnover in the game. It was like a fumble by Stafford, I think, and that was it. And everything else was just Arizona just playing with the food a little bit in that game, and it was too easy for them. So the Rams look a bit cooked. I'm actually looking at the pass blocking grade again, PFF, so take with a pinch of salt. I'm looking at the pass blocking grades. There's only 3 teams with a pass blocking grade in the 80s in some cases 1 week, because it's the Eagles have yet to play tonight. So it's the Eagles, the Colts, and the Packers, and that's it. And then surprisingly, the Saints are up there as well. There's a lot of teams that are struggling to pass block. And you go the further, the Seahawks are currently ranked 30th ahead of the Falcons and the Rams, who are rock bottom in the league. Might be good news that the Dolphins are just ahead of the Seahawks in this list. So that's encouraging for next week, especially with Tua Tagovailoa not playing. But it is a league-wide problem. And I don't think that problem is going to be solved anytime soon. We're going to pivot to the defense in a second. And then I've got some other topics I want to throw Jeff's way. But let's get through the Super Chats first. Jayanth, really appreciate that, man. 2-0. Let's go, Hawks. Really appreciate the support for the channel, Jayanth. Really appreciate that, man. Thank you very much. Taryn says, Geno saved our... I can't say the American... I've just got to say arse. I'm sorry. Geno saved our arse. Start Haynes and bench Tomlinson, says Taryn. Thank you for the super chat. Noah says, unfortunately, I missed the post-game stream, but very happy to pull out a win. We're a young team. Wins like this are so good for them. O-line scares me. I think I agree with that, Noah. Thank you for the super chat. That, with a young team, sort of getting those experiences, especially on the road, and finding a way to win, it's invaluable. Graham says, great word, Rob. After de-stressing after the game last night, what a great win. Felt so much like a PC game, but with a decent OC and DC. Yeah. It is, it's amazing when you have an offensive coordinator who is prepared to throw the ball to your best players often, and just decide, you know what, the run's not getting it done today. DK, Jackson Smith and Jigba, you're getting a ton of targets, and that's what got the job done on offense yesterday. And this one from Hawks fan Matt, man, it says, how much of an improvement of the O-line play do you think is realistic to expect during this season? That's a good question, Jeff. So before we move on to the defense, what is realistic? Because I believe in Grubb and Huff. I think they can find improvements. I think it's going to take a long time, though. I mean, I think that probably, based on what I've seen after 2 weeks, the best I think we can hope for is like the 24th best line in the league. And frankly, if you probably give me that now, I'd probably take it because it's just. The other thing is like, can they be good at something? Can it be good at pass blocking or good at run blocking? At least I don't know, be good at one of those things. But I think the chances are that week to week it's going to fluctuate between the two.
Yeah, that's the thing. The group hasn't played much together. They've been only here with these guys for 6 weeks, 7 weeks, and we see personnel issues. Guard was a position that me and you thought should have been a first round priority, and if Byron Murphy didn't go there and they ended up drafting a cornerback, that would be a situation we'd look back on, and it would really be critical of that because I don't know if Troy Faitanu was playing in Pittsburgh. I have not seen much of them, to be fair. But I don't know if you've seen Fuaga in New Orleans. He's been playing left tackle. He's been phenomenal. And he was a guy that me and you had as, if this guy's on the board, they better draft this guy. So Cooper Beebe's a guy they were really high on. But again, they didn't have the chance at Fuaga or Beebe. So again, this is a position, I think it's a personnel-related issue. The guards aren't very good. And I do believe in Scott Huff, and I know he's a detail-oriented coach, but really the best hope is that Abe Lucas comes back and he could be an impact player, and that will solidify you on the edges a little bit. And then you have, I think Connor Williams, his numbers hasn't graded out too well, but I haven't watched him one game and be like, this guy doesn't know what he's doing. Like, he looks like a competent center, which is what he was brought in. He's signed for $4 million. That's a pretty good deal of a guy coming off an ACL. So I'm with you. I can't imagine too much of a ceiling unless like Haynes and Abe Lucas both hit, and then 4 of your 5 spots are good, but that's really grasping at straws. I can't imagine that happening. And I saw the Rams also lost Jonah Jackson, who was their one healthy lineman. So they're out of line.
I've just read that they only have, I think, one more injured reserve spot left. So
I've not seen a team get injured like this before.
So they're going to have to just have like 52 men on the roster soon. They just can't, and then that's what this could spiral. I mean, it'd be so true of the Rams to end up with a top 5 pick or something, and then end up drafting a legendary player to replace the legendary player who's just retired. But hopefully that will not happen. I mean, I will say this, based on what I've watched of the college football season after 3 weeks, there are not many legendary players in this draft class. So I've not seen an Aaron Donald pass rusher yet, and the guy that. The edge rusher at Tennessee that everyone was talking up, he's got 1 tackle after 3 games. He's not got anything. So I don't think there's much to worry about. So is that good?
I like the Penn State kid better than the Tennessee guy so far. And unless they get like Travis Hunter, but I don't know. Denver looks like they're going to need a high pick too. So
there's a few teams that are going to be picking out, and 1 or 2 of them have taken, like Carolina and Denver have taken quarterbacks recently, and you kind of wonder whether they're going to be sat there in the draft going, should we do it again? Like
you saw what happened with Carolina today, right?
Yeah. So Bryce Young has been benched. I was going to ask you about that. So before we, because I do want to talk about the defense, I think there's some important things to talk about the defensive line. So Bryce Young has been benched. I suspect there's probably a bit of internal pressure from the owner because the owner is nuts, and I think also Dave Canales is probably fearing for his job already because it's not just that they're losing, is they're losing it in the most embarrassing fashion imaginable, getting blown out. So they've gone to Andy Dalton. Like, do you think Bryce Young is he done? Like, Bryce Young's people are leaking to the media that they did not expect this, and they're really pissed off. So that's a bad sign. So is he done in Carolina? And the other thing I would ask Jeff is he done? Because I think someone will give him another chance in the same way that Trey Lance is getting another chance in Dallas right now as like the 3rd quarterback. But is he done, not interested from a Seahawks perspective? Like, I think he probably is. I had him as the 4th quarterback in the draft class a year ago because of his size. I thought he looked like Steph Curry at times with the way that he was playing. But the size bothered me. Like, his helmet looks too big for his body because he's that small, and it's a worry. So I'm not convinced he's ever going to be able to make it. But he was the 1st overall pick, and I spoke to people in the NFL who were convinced he should be the 1st overall pick over CJ Stroud. Like, it was not even it was a no-brainer for them. Like, it was, this guy should be the 1st overall pick, and he was the consensus media 1st overall pick as well. So. I don't personally have much interest there. Do you have any interest there at all? I mean, look, it'd be very easy to swap him with Sam Howell at the end of the season because Sam Howell played in Carolina. So that may, I think the fans would welcome that, but it's whether or not you would welcome him as a reclamation project in return, Bryce Young. I'm not sure that I would be, to be honest.
Yeah, I'm not crazy about the idea either. He just looks so small out there. And we went through like Russell Wilson. He may have had the playmaking, but we saw the limitations with his size. And we saw that he couldn't throw it in the middle of the field. And he was really limited when he had to pass. And listen, Russell was maybe the best playmaker at his prime I've ever seen as a quarterback. Bryce Young's that size without like Russell's thickness. He doesn't seem to have the playmaking. And like he looked like a broken player the last 2 games. Like, so I'm just not seeing like some of the pockets he had at Alabama were massive. And he was playing with like, so in our situation where we have a shitty offensive line, and I don't know if this is the situation for Bryce. Obviously, like I'm always okay to take a flyer on something, but I think for Bryce to have a chance, he's going to need a really good offensive line. He's going to need a really functional offense. So I might say the Rams, but right now they're in flux completely. So they're going to need someone like the Rams might take a flyer just because Stafford's a little older. But from a Seahawks perspective, it's crazy to think number 1 pick. They did those pictures with him last year. I don't know what their grade was on him, but I sort of listened to your evaluation at the time, and there was concerns. And watching him play, I haven't seen anything. So Carolina blew it with Baker Mayfield. They looks like they should have held on to him a little longer, or maybe they should have put a situation to develop him. But right now with Bryce, I don't see it.
What's amazing about Carolina is, the owner comes in, I want a quarterback. They trade a high pick for Sam Darnold and then just get rid of him. They trade a pick for Baker Mayfield. They get rid of him. They trade up for Bryce Young. They're going to get rid of him. It's like, do you not realize how haphazard and dumb this is? And they've got themselves into this position. Like a couple of years ago, they came to Seattle and kicked Seattle's ass, like in the trenches. Like they had good defenders, tough physical team, and they've lost all of that. And now they're just a shell. They're a husk. They're awful. And look, on Bryce Young, I just remember watching, there was all the pro days were like in the same week, like Anthony Richardson, Will Levis, CJ Stroud, Bryce Young. The Seahawks guys went on that little tour, didn't they, and had all the selfies with them. And the one thing about the Bryce Young was he just looked so decidedly unspecial, physically. Like the throwing, like CJ Stroud would do a few party tricks. Levis, Anthony Richardson was like running around and launching it 100 yards. And then Bryce Young would come out and he would go, he looks small. He's not doing any of that stuff. I don't know how this translates. And like, I get when you watch the tape, he's making plays on 3rd down. There were games where they won Alabama because of him, purely because of him. So I understand why teams liked that aspect of it, but it was very hard to sort of look at him and think, this is going to be a special NFL player unless he is just an anomaly. And he, like Kyler Murray, is small, but he's sturdy and small and so freaking creative, like, and tricky, an amazing arm, like unbelievable arm, Kyler Murray, like superhuman strength for like basically a man of his size. And Bryce Young had none of that. So it's a thumbs down from me, but someone's going to give him a chance probably at the end of the season. Right. Defensive line. Keep your super chats coming in. Defensive line. Really mixed opinions from me, Jeff, like having reflected on that game. I thought Leonard Williams had a good game, played very well. And he needs to because he's expensive and all of that, but played very well. I thought Byron Murphy had flashes. I think Jaron Reed was essentially Jaron Reed, just a steadying force. I've had a look at the grades. Jonathan Hankins had a shocking run defense grade, that's all he's on the team for. Like he was like the worst in the team for run defense. And you kind of think, well, that's disappointing because that's essentially what you are, mate. Like you are a run blocker. Draymond Jones had a bad run block grade as well. Derek Hall, not so good. Byron Murphy, not good in the run blocking. So a mixed bag. I sense that like perhaps the performance of Hankins and maybe a bit of Murphy and Jones versus the run is what were the issues. And the players who played well, like Leonard Williams, just couldn't really compensate for that. They couldn't do the job of 3 or 4 people, and neither could the linebackers, with people maybe not playing that well up front. And that's why they got run on. But I do think they've got the personnel to be a lot better there, Jeff. So it's not a huge concern. And in terms of pressures, Boya Mafe had something like 6 pressures, 4 hurries. Derek Hall had a really good play at one point. It did feel Leonard Williams had a sack and a half. Byron Murphy had a half a sack, and that was a really good move from him. So there were some really encouraging things that they've got to finish some of these sacks, Jeff. They had opportunities to have a lot more sacks. Got to finish, but there was some encouragement there, I thought, as well, with the pass rush.
Yeah, I think you covered it really well. It was some real highs and some real lows. Like there's no play that escalated or described how that game went. Boya Mafe blows up into the backfield, has Antonio Gibson for a 7-yard loss, like an incredible athleticism. He whiffs on a tackle. Gibson runs for 45 yards, and I thought that was the play that ended the game for New England. And there were just plays like that where Boye, his pressure numbers are excellent, and Byron Murphy's getting into the backfield, but you see his small arms can show up a little bit, and he has trouble finishing. And you're right, Leonard Williams played pretty solid, not as well as the week before, but still a really good game. And I thought he was one of their best defensive players. He's still disrupting a lot. And you see why they paid this guy. But, yeah, Hankins had a tough day. There was plays where he just whiffed on the run defense or he got pushed off the ball. And Aiden Dirty handpicked this guy from being around him. And if you looked at his split stats the last 2 years in Dallas, their numbers with him on the field versus off were shockingly good. But there's just not enough. And run defense is a group effort. It's not one or two guys. They don't have a Vita Vea. They don't have a guy like that. They need all of their front seven to really play good run defense. And this is where you miss Uchenna Nwosu. He is a really good run defender. The numbers when he's on and off the field, we haven't seen him in the scheme. We haven't really seen him in the last year. So when they have Draymond Jones has been a pretty below average run player. He's not great there. He's fine at setting an edge, but he's not an impact player there. He can get pushed off the ball. Jaron Reed looks fine, but he wasn't flashing into the backfield. But it was a tough day overall for the run defense, and they gave up almost 180 yards on the ground. And the worst part of it is you knew how New England could win the game. Watching them, there's one way they can play. They're not built to throw the ball from behind. And obviously in the first half, they couldn't cover freaking Hunter Henry. And that's where it did, as some of your commenters said, it felt like a Pete Carroll game. That felt like a Pete Carroll first half where it's like, I have everything covered except the one guy, and he's wide open every time. And I was losing my mind. But yeah, I think they missed Uchenna Nwosu yesterday. I still think you're seeing flashes from Derek Hall. He's putting it together. He's definitely taking a step forward. But they need to impact. The interior defensive lineman is the strength of this team. And a game like that, they should have been better. And Mike, if you listen to him on Brock and Salk, if you listen to his press conference, he seemed annoyed by it. And Julian Love mentioned they were a little sluggish to start for a 10 a.m. game. And I didn't think it was a great performance by the defense overall. They made stops at the end, especially in overtime. Terrell Dodson made a hell of a play. Tyrese Knight made some good tackles, but yeah, they left a lot to be desired in the run defense. And I don't know if that's a first game. I don't know if it's a tough opponent, but they're going to need to be better. That should hopefully be a bit of a wake-up call.
Yeah, I thought it was noticeable that Devin Witherspoon, I know he was getting flagged, so that was probably the reason why he looked frustrated. But he's like, I've always kind of thought Devin Witherspoon plays with kind of like a reckless abandon, that he kind of always has this look in his eye like he's just about to hammer somebody. And yet in the game when I was watching yesterday, it felt like his expression was, he almost looked a little stressed, like a little frustrated, like things are not working out here how I would hoped. And he looked a little bit sluggish. And I do just wonder whether that was just like first road game, long trip to the other side of the country, 10 a.m., and maybe some of that was playing a part there. And, we'll see how they get on next week, because there are so many, there's so much to like about this defense, Jeff. Like there are so many good young players. You just want to see, as the weeks move on, a bit of consistency there. Like they were superb against Denver, but it was against Bo Nix. And like Bo Nix again yesterday, man. I mean, like, if you're who was that Broncos media guy who was saying that they had their franchise quarterback before the game? I mean, that guy just someone needs to throw a shoe at him, because like, what I mean, like apart from the analysis, like it's a crap troll, because clearly they don't. And second of all, talk about tempting fate. I mean, Bo Nix looks like he's about to get run out of town already after 2 weeks. Like the guy, like he had a flea flicker and that was it in the last game. So, they did okay. They managed him very well and good game. Jacoby Brissett is not like an elite quarterback, and that was not a top tier passing game. And I'd like to see them play not perhaps at the level when they face Bo Nix, but just as a nice, comfortable level, Jeff, where there's not anything, no extremes in their performance when they play a good opponent. I expect, like, when they play the Lions are going to get some yards. They're going to get some first downs. They're going to score some points. Let's just not have like 200 rushing yards. Let's not have 450 passing yards. Let's just have, like, in the game, close contest, defense is like giving as good as it gets kind of thing. Can we have that kind of, if we can, that will be encouraging. And, you know, as much as we talk about the offensive line, I must, and that, like, right now, like, draft happens tomorrow, what are you picking? It's an offensive lineman. But I also think, you know, I like the idea of keep adding pieces to this defense, whether it is free agency or the draft, with the idea of turning it into a fantastic, it just feels like it's so close to being something really good. It's maybe just missing like a piece or two right now. I don't know what that is, Jeff. I don't have the answer, but just like one or two extra pieces, and this could be a really special unit. And I just wonder if we're going into an era of football here. You mentioned it earlier, like the way that the game has just changed a little bit. It's just changed a little bit with the passing touchdowns and the way that the games are being played. There was only 3 quarterbacks who had 300 yards at the weekend. One of them was Geno Smith. He was the only quarterback who threw 300 yards and won. Like, Patrick Mahomes had 150 yards in his game and won. Like, it just feels like maybe after a period where it was very much a passing league, whether, I don't know if it's a renaissance with defense or whether it's just, you know, maybe the Seahawks appointed a defensive head coach at the right time. You know, when I was like saying, get an offensive guy and whatever, like, I must admit, sitting here today, I'm wondering, you know, I'm quite happy they went with the defensive head coach, if this is the way that the league's going to go for the next few years.
Yeah, it seems like Macdonald has been on the forefront of a lot of these changes where, like, if you watch the Niners yesterday, Brian Flores kind of broke that offensive scheme. And Brock Purdy went up to Flores after the game and said, like, man, your scheme's hard. And that's where Macdonald really kind of earned his spot last year, what they did to all those offensive guys. It was Mike McDaniel, and we're going to see that this week. And he did it to Shanahan, and McVay actually gave him some trouble, but he did it to Ben Johnson. He did it to the Shane Waldron. Well, everyone seems to do it to Shane Waldron. But it's, I don't know if it's timing, but if this whole thing goes in circles, but it seems like some of the defensive guys, and Tennessee's another defense that's had a lot of success early, come from that Baltimore scheme. But oddly enough, Baltimore has not looked very good on defense this year, and they've got one of Macdonald's linebackers coaches that was supposed to come to Seattle, Zach Orr, and they've looked sloppy defensively, and their players have not played nearly as well. So, yeah, the game does tend to be cyclical, and some of the ways to combat a lot of these passing games has been like the 2 high safety looks, and now they're trying to disrupt the run game, and that's where these defenses have gone and really different, where quarterbacks usually really take advantage of like pre-snap looks. And you see in Seattle, it's really hard to identify. And I thought New England actually did a really good job of identifying Hunter Henry yesterday as like a hole in the Seattle's defense. But yeah, the Seahawks are like an edge rusher away from being like a dominant defense. And like Boye Mafe is trending that way. He looks phenomenal, but he's not like an Aiden Hutchinson or something. If you like replace Draymond Jones with like a guy like that, I think this defense would jump over the top. I doubt you're going to get like a Fred Warner in the middle of this defense or something like that. But I've been really impressed with the play of the safeties. And it's just, you see like the difference in like some of the liabilities they had out there the last few years, that they were trotting this older defense. And now they have all these interesting young players. And yeah, it's been interesting because I just keep finding myself more impressed with Macdonald. I listened to him on Brock and Salk today. And just the way he was describing his decisions in the game, Rob, I don't know if you heard it. It's like night and day listening to Pete Carroll talk in the last year. And he was talking about the 4th and 1 and basically the process that went into that. And they said before the drive, they knew this is a 4-down drive. And then they got to the point where like they didn't expect to have to even have that decision. And they get 14 yards on 3rd and 15. And Macdonald already had the mindset of we're going for it if we get on 4th down. And they get there and they didn't run a very good play, if I'm being honest. But just hearing his whole process and like who he's talking to in the play, and then hear Pete Carroll be like, you know, I felt like challenging it because I felt like it. And like the Bears coach kind of did that last night. He had an awful challenge. And I'm sitting there watching the Bears last night, and I'm like, oh boy. And then Macdonald, like, they had 3 timeouts with a minute to go in the first half. When was the last time the Seahawks had that? And I'm listening to this guy who's like super prepared, super detailed. And I've seen some of these like New England writers talk about like some of the schemes the Seahawks ran to like combat them and like how far they went back. Like they used a scheme that Belichick used 20 years ago, apparently, to combat their all-out blitz. And I don't know if it's just a defensive thing, but I just, every week, the more I watch this team, I'm like, holy crap, they found a guy. I think this guy is special.
Well, yes, I listened to Mike Macdonald today and had very similar thoughts to you. I mean, I did think a little bit like, one thing I do like about Mike Macdonald is he kind of has a laugh and a joke on this show.
Yeah.
And like he takes the piss a little bit at some of the questions, and I enjoyed that. I mean, Pete Carroll was very grumpy on that show last season. Like they streamed the video of Carroll. He didn't just hear it. And there were a couple of times that like Brock Hewitt asked him a question and he would be like very much like throwing his head back and like rolling his eyes, or he'd be like mouthing something to sulk at the question. And it was like, does he know that he's being filmed? Like, and it was it got like it all sort of added to the like, that was not how I remember Pete Carroll. Like when he first came to this team, he was like effervescent. He was full of, and to me, he just looked fed up throughout the whole last season, despite his protestations that he didn't at the end of the year. He looked and sounded fed up. And Mike Macdonald does not, is the complete opposite end of his career. Like Mike Macdonald's at the very start. I love the fact that he was asked, like, did you watch the film on the way home? And he was like, no, I watched some program on the Kingdom or something like English history or something. And then he said he fell asleep. He tried to watch the Houston game and then put the series on he was watching, A Kingdom in Time or something. I don't know. And then he fell asleep. And I thought, that's great. Like, he's just being honest. Like, he's not, and I don't mind that. Like, recharge, watch it tomorrow. Like, it doesn't matter. The world's not going to end because he didn't watch the tape on the flight home. So, liked all of that. Do you know what you're absolutely right. Like, if there was somebody, I just, when you were sort of talking there, like, what is the thing that could kind of like elevate? I know there's no chance of this one. This will never happen in a million years. Because I think he's going to be in the same place his whole career. And I don't think he's going to play forever. I think he's probably got like, 4 or 5 more years and then he's done. But like watching Max Crosby, like constantly play with his hair on fire, like kicking ass every week. And like, I don't know if you saw the video yesterday of like, he went over to Gardner Minshew after an interception, like grabbed hold of him and was just like, come on, man. Yeah, he got him going and Minshew like high-fived him and ran off. I just thought, gee, I'd love to have that guy rush at the edge. Like he just, I think he can fit in any scheme and he just play with his hair on fire and he like elevate things. He feels like a Legion of Boom type player to me. And there'll be no chance of getting him. But like maybe if the Raiders had a horrendous season, you could, and I don't think the draft's going to be the most amazing draft next year. You could chuck a few picks the Raiders way, but it's a pipe dream. It's, we're going down the pipe dream trade scenarios again. So I don't think that one is particularly likely. So yeah, the Seahawks get the win and move to 2-0. Before I just ask you about some thoughts on the Miami game, just, we have kind of talked a little bit about, Bryce Young moving on and stuff like that. First of all, I mentioned this to you in a DM the other day. Can you remember that there were people petitioning for Dave Canales to be the Seahawks head coach? Like, how relieved are you that nobody paid attention to that?
First of all, I thought that showed just such a lack of understanding of the situation. I don't know if you've heard Dave Canales talk or if you've heard his interviews. He's Pete Carroll. They're the same person. They're like the super optimist. Canales specializes in quarterbacks. Carroll specializes in defense, or used to specialize in defense. But there was no way, kind of getting the tea leaves from John Schneider and hearing all these stories, that after all these years, he's been waiting to hire a head coach. The guy he's going to hire is like Pete Carroll light. There was no way. It was so far-fetched. And I was just like, even if Canales was like a special OC, I thought that was just like showed a complete lack of understanding. And Pete alluded in his post, like when he got fired, he was like, okay, John, it's on you now. Like there was some tension there, I think, a little bit by the end. And I think John, to be honest, wanted him gone. And so that I thought was an absurd suggestion. They didn't even interview him, number one. They never let him promote him to OC when he was here. Some
people suggested that was a complete oversight on Seattle's behalf for not interviewing him. I mean, to me, why would you interview him?
I thought it was pretty absurd he got the job, to be honest. I thought that was more of like a crony situation where him and Dan Morgan worked together in Seattle and he knows him. And I don't know how many coaches were lying.
Nobody else wanted the job.
That's the thing. And all of a sudden, Tampa looks pretty good without him. And it's just like, I never understood that suggestion. I thought it was just an easy two and two together. And frankly, that would have been a massive mistake. And it looks laughable at this time as they look worse than last year, if that's possible.
And then the 49ers losing against the Vikings. When I watched Monday Night Football, I was a little bit concerned at how good the Niners looked. And they looked like the Niners. You know, I was expecting them to have a slight regression given everything that's gone on. And then when you watch them against the Jets, I thought, no, they're not missing a step. And yet a week later, Christian McCaffrey's going to miss, I think Ian Rappaport was saying like 6 weeks, potentially. And who knows if that'll be longer. They then lose to the Vikings with Sam Darnold. You know, Kevin O'Connell's done a great job in Minnesota to get through this quarterback mess and to go and win games like that and to start 2-0. Fair play to him. But I don't know whether that has brought me back towards being encouraged, Jeff, or whether it's just like the Niners tend to drop a game like this. They seem to always lose in Minnesota for some reason. It's like their place to lose. What do you make of them after a couple of games now that they're 1-1?
I'm really confused because I was kind of under the impression like they had all that offseason turmoil. I saw some flaws in some of their roster that wasn't as strong, in my opinion, as last year. And they go out in week 1 and they win in a way that just scared the crap out of me because they didn't win like how the Niners usually win with all these like creative passing plays and Shanahan just like scheming the crap out of people. They won by just trench play. It was trench play. They dominated the run game by Shanahan's scheme. They look great on run defense, which was an area I thought they might have some issues after losing a couple key players. And I was like, oh. Like as much as I love the Seahawks' progress and I was excited, I'm just like, this team looks unstoppable again. And they go out yesterday and all of what I saw in the first week against the Jets, I don't know if they took the Vikings lightly or they just were caught off guard or they just had one of those down games. But it looked like Trent Williams allowed, I think, 5 or 6 pressures yesterday. He never allows pressures. And the offensive line, which I thought was going to be a problem, was destroyed yesterday. They were in the backfield. I don't think Brock Purdy, I think he was sacked 6 times yesterday, and they struggled in the run game. Like Dominic Pooney was a guy I was really upset about because how good he looked in the week 1. And he had an awful grade last week, and he got blown off a bunch of run plays. And Aaron Jones fumbled the ball in the end zone. They should have won that game by 17 points. And that's how the game felt watching. I had that game on while the Seahawks game was on. The Vikings blew them out. And not only was it just like, and then when I looked at some of the analytics today, the Niners weren't getting separation in the pass game. They had like the lowest separation score of any team in the league. And they allowed a 97-yard touchdown to Justin Jefferson where their 2 safeties got confused in coverage. And so some of the things that I saw in the offseason where I'm like, I don't think their run defense is very good. I think they have some issue at safety, and they struggled yesterday. Brock Purdy was outplayed by Sam Darnold, and frankly, they were outcoached by O'Connell and Flores. And Flores and Mike Macdonald run those creative kind of defenses, and seeing the Niners struggle. And I'm tired of these Niners where Christian McCaffrey goes out. And don't get me wrong, McCaffrey is an incredible player. Like he is an all-pro, Hall of Fame level player. But the Niners have what? 7 all-pros? Like, how many all-pros do the Seahawks have? 0? Probably at this point. And every time one of them is out, their players, their fans, their media is like, well, Christian McCaffrey's out. How are they supposed to function? So if you take one all-pro to their 7 out of their lineup, they can no longer function. To me, like, it's ridiculous. So I still think they're a very good team. I still think they'll respond because of the talent they have. But, like, a guy like Brandon Ayuk is not impacting the game right now. George Kittle got banged up again yesterday. He had to leave for an IV. And when Brock Purdy, everything isn't working around him. I thought he played pretty solid, but he didn't take over the game. So they are a little more vulnerable than the past. Like they looked like a juggernaut last year. And like only games they lost were the games Trent Williams was out and that Mike Macdonald game. But that was one of their weaker performances I've seen from them in this era. And even though they lost, they hadn't looked that bad in any game. So I don't know what to make. It's the 2 games where you saw like the highs and the lows, but they don't. My opinion of them is they're still very good, but they're not the juggernaut I thought they were the last 2 years. And without McCaffrey, they didn't look like it, if we're being honest.
A couple of super chats for us about the Dolphins. This one, Christian says, did Geno's performance, Sons Walker, raise either of your perceived ceilings for this team playoff-wise? I mean, my answer to that, Christian, would be, ceiling for the Seahawks has been that I think they can compete for the NFC West depending on what the Niners are like. Like if the Niners just end up being like the Niners they have in the past, I think it's going to be difficult to top them. But I would expect the Seahawks, especially with 7 seeds now, like look, even last year when they were pretty awful for a large stretch of that season, they almost got in the playoffs. So I would expect the Seahawks to get to the playoffs. And then once they get there, even if they win the division or if they just have to set for a wild card, Jeff, my position on this is I kind of need to see them win a playoff game before I can really sort of invest in that. Now, can they, there are clearly teams in the NFC that the Seahawks can beat in the playoffs. And it's still a game of football. I know there's like put a playoff logos on the field. It's a game of football, so they can win, but they can. I also feel they can lose to a lot of teams in the NFC in the playoffs. So that his performance against the Pats does not make me suddenly think now the Seahawks can go to the NFC Championship game. I'm going to probably be whatever happens, even if the Seahawks win 13 games. I need to see them win postseason games before I can make any kind of bold prediction about the postseason. For me, a good season will be getting to the playoffs. And then if you get a home game, win it. And if you get a road game, at the very least, be very competitive in that road playoff game. I think that would be a good place to be. I think that's a modest expectation, a realistic expectation, Jeff, for what would be a good season. And if they go beyond that, it would be an excellent season, even if they don't get to the NFC Championship game. That said, the Lions were that close to get into the Super Bowl last year, and they were crap yesterday. And the Eagles, looked like world beaters for 5 weeks last year, and then looked like a top 5 drafting team in the end of the year. So, like, things can change. Weird things can kind of happen. Players get injured, as we see. That changes seasons. I think it's very open in the NFC, and we'll see what they can do. But I'm not really making a postseason prediction yet.
Yeah, I think everything you said was fair, and I love that Geno played so well. But to answer that question, my answer is no. It comes down to offensive line to me. I think that raises their ceiling far more than anything else on this team. You mentioned Detroit. Detroit in that playoff game with the Niners, they dominated up front. They were just moving the ball at will. They're blowing them off the ball. And Green Bay had the same kind of success. Green Bay's offensive line is very good, and that's where they had a lot of success. And the Niners were having trouble protecting against some of those better teams. And so, yeah, it's great to see Geno win a game. But if we're being objective, they've beaten Jacoby Brissett and Bo Nix. And Brissett really impressed me yesterday. Don't get me wrong. I thought he did things that I didn't think he was capable of yesterday. But we're talking like playoffs, and the NFC does look better. To me, it comes down to if the offensive line, if they're playing like this, every game's going to be a challenge. And even though the defense didn't play great yesterday, which could have blown that game away easy, I think as well as the Geno did play, I think they're going to need to protect better to have a chance to make a run in the playoffs.
I think if you put the 16th best defensive line on this team and improve the run defense from yesterday, that'd be a heck of a team. Yeah. That'd be a heck of a playoff team. But how likely is that? I don't know. THB says, sounds like Cooper Kupp is going to miss 4 to 6 weeks. Could even be longer than that. It was a nasty injury. So we will see. And obviously the safety's been announced. Jonah Jackson's out. Cooper Kupp is out. And I'm pretty sure, yes, John Johnson has suffered a hairline fracture as well. And he's expected to miss 4 to 6 weeks. So the season is collapsing for the Rams. And I don't take any enjoyment out of that. I personally would rather beat the Rams with their best team, minus Aaron Donald, than beat a shell of a Rams team in a few weeks' time. So we will see what happens there. So Dolphins then, Jeff. I'm not one of these people who's going to sit here and go, every game's tough in the NFL and you can't, be bold and all that. Clearly those things are true. Every NFL game is tough, but I'm not playing in the game. So I don't really have to sort of have that approach. I'm just a mere observer. Let's just say it as it is. The Seahawks should beat Skylar Thompson next week. And it will be disappointing if they don't. There's no getting away from that. And I know it's, based on what we've seen, 2 one-score wins for the Seahawks so far, losing to Miami with Tua and Tyreek and Waddle at full strength and all of those players, that's one thing. If they lose to Skylar Thompson, it will be disappointing. So I do think they need to go and win this game one way or the other. It doesn't have to be pretty, but they've got to find a way to win. But how do you view this matchup, given that Tagovailoa is not going to be playing and, basically a quarterback who, the Dolphins should have a better backup than Skylar Thompson, especially given Tua's injury history.
Yeah, they had Mike White on their roster, and they thought he was a capable backup, and he just played so bad in preseason training camp. They just outright waived him, and I think that caught them off guard, and they're left to the situation. They picked up Tyler Huntley today, who I think is actually a pretty decent backup. I actually thought the Seahawks might invest in him, but yeah, this is a game the defense should do a lot better, and if they struggle on defense, that's a pretty big red flag. Where we know Miami's going to have to win very. And Skylar Thompson's a pretty bad backup. Like we saw him play in a playoff game a couple of years ago, and we saw him play, and he couldn't like run basic pass game. And it's unfortunate because I wanted to see a kind of a measuring stick game, Miami and Mike McDaniel against Mike Macdonald. I thought that would have been a really fun game, but frankly, they looked kind of off to start the year before Tua got injured anyway. So I don't know Jalen Waddle, and their offensive line also got really banged up in that game, and it's not a great offensive line to begin with. So this is a game where you need to see the defense play a lot better. You want to see them play a lot better in run game. And one of the things that we really lost under Pete Carroll is what they had this home field advantage where it was really hard to play in Seattle, especially on defense. And then the last few years, it totally disappeared. Like that Pittsburgh game was like the final nail in the coffin there for Carroll. But like nothing summed up like they lost their home field advantage on defense than like the last few years. So I want this to become a thing again, especially with Macdonald here, where they can play such strong defense. In week one, they look fantastic defensively. So this is a game they should dominate on defense. They play an inferior opponent. I know they have great receivers, but they don't have a third receiver. They don't have a tight end. There's not much there. So this is a game I want Seattle to win comfortably. And if not, if they're struggling with these inferior quarterbacks in 3 straight weeks, it's not a great sign. But I do think this is a game we're not going to learn too much about them other than can Mike Macdonald get them prepared for inferior opponents? And frankly, that was an issue under the previous staff. We saw that game they lost to Colt McCoy that cost them the number 1 seed that one year or cost them a bye. And we've seen this happen so many times over the years, and we're going to learn a lot. But yeah, this is a game where they should really play well defensively. And I want to see them against a creative run scheme. I want to see them look a little better in run defense. This is a game where they're going to need to play better against a really fast running back in Devin Achane.
I've just had a look at the weather forecast, and it says showers and a low of 58 and a high of 66. So not Miami weather. That's a good thing. I mean, I think rain would be a good thing for this game. And I know that might act as a little bit of an equalizer if the Dolphins want to make it a run fest. But Skylar Thompson on the road in Seattle in the rain, he's going to have to throw it at some point, like you would imagine. And yeah, I'd sort of trust Geno Smith to handle the conditions, having played a lot of games in Seattle better than he would. So I'll take the rain. Give me that. Give me Tyreek looking up at the sky and thinking, get me back to Miami. Stuff like that. I think those kind of things would benefit the Seahawks. So I'm going to hope for rain. Sorry to anybody in Seattle who's not down with that because I'm 5,000 miles away. But I'm hoping for a bit of rain on Sunday for this game, so the Seahawks can give themselves a great chance of winning. I think, no, we've gone through all of the super chats, so I think we're just about there. Jeff, appreciate your time as always. Great to hear from Jeff. We're going to try and do this after every game that the Seahawks play, and hopefully they'll keep winning. Hopefully, maybe that's why they're winning, Jeff, because we're doing this every week now. And we think, we want to give you something positive to talk about. So
they should be 3-0 too. Like they should win this game.
That would be chef's kiss. If we're sat here talking about 3-0 next week and then ahead of a big Lions game as well, that'd be really, really good. So thanks for all the super chats. Thanks to everybody who has been watching along. Make sure to subscribe to the channel because it really helps. And there's only about 50%, 60% of you who are subscribed who watch these videos. So it'd be good to get those numbers up. So make sure you subscribe if you haven't already. Like the video, leave a comment. Everything helps. SeahawksDraftBlog.com for more analysis. Big draft article coming in the next 2 days with all of my notes from the weekend. We'll try and get it out tomorrow, if not Wednesday. Well worth a read. Lots of big thoughts there on what I watched in college football over the weekend. Again, thank you for all of the super chats and all of the comments in the live chat. Until next time, bye for now.